A lot of these guys have not necessarily set their core values in place, their guiding principles. How do you go about uncovering in an organization, in a business, what your core values, your guiding principles are?
Well, I would say the first thing likely to do when you're trying to solve that problem is don't fall prey to HR or managerial speak. You know, there's nothing I find more painful, except maybe reading art criticism, than reading badly written corporate vision statements.
Oh, God.
Because mostly they look to me like they're post hoc justifications and hand waving. And that makes them hypocritical and false, as well as generally inelegant and painful, sort of aesthetically. That's a really bad idea. What you want to do instead is you want to figure out what it is that you're trying to do. And maybe what you're trying to do, it's possible that what you're trying to do fundamentally is make money. And I actually don't think there's anything wrong with that fundamentally. I don't think that should be something that is, what would you say, core to your life, because if you're willing to sacrifice everything to money, you're going to run into some serious problems very, very rapidly. But, you know, as part of your business endeavor, I actually think it's a worthwhile goal because it brings a certain amount of discipline to your endeavors. You know, I do almost everything I do on a for-profit basis because it's one of the ways of stopping yourself from making stupid decisions, right? Because it's not that easy to run something in a manner that will actually generate a profit, and it keeps you lean and careful and focused if you require yourself to do that. And you shouldn't be apologetic about that either, because unless you're willing to sacrifice everything to money, attempting to run something profitably just means that you're running it in a way that can maintain the organization and allow it to grow. And in principle, that's admirable. If you want to derive your core values, you have to figure out, well, why the hell are you doing what you're doing? You know, what is it? And you really have to think that through. It's like you're willing to devote your life, your time, your resources, your energy, the time you could be spending with your family. You're willing to devote this to this enterprise. Well, what is your enterprise aiming at? And it probably has one aim that's transcendent, let's say, and by that I mean above all other aims, and you need to be very clear about what that is. And once you are clear about what that is, there will be a handful of principles, like game rules, that will emerge from that. If this is what we're doing, then we have to do this. And you don't want too many of those, because they say bad rules drive out respect for good rules, right? It's minimum necessary rules. You're playing a game of sorts. There's some victory in mind. And in order to play that game and obtain the victory, there's a set of rules that you have to abide by, or principles that will enable your actions. And that's what your core values are, and that's part of your mission statement. Like, a mission statement isn't some ethical postage stamp that you paste over what you're actually up to look good. That's unbelievably damaging and hypocritical. What a mission statement is, and a statement of core values, is it emerges as the consequence of serious thought about what it is that you're engaged in. You know, like if you're working in construction, well, high quality housing, aesthetically pleasing, at the lowest possible cost, delivered with maximal efficiency to clients that you serve hospitably and develop long-term relationships with. Like, that's a pretty good vision. I mean, people need somewhere to live, and they obviously need someone to provide it. And if you're going to do it, you might as well do it well. And why not make it beautiful and treat your customers properly while you're doing it? Like, where's the moral inadequacy in that? You know, and maybe the leftists will shake a finger at you and say, well, you're doing it at a profit, and and that's all for you. It's like the proper response to that is, well, you're an inefficient dimwit if you run it at a loss, and so there's no morality there. Well, obviously, and you can't grow and you can't market, and it's just a sign of your inadequacy. There's no exploitation in profit, not if you understand that, well, there is no exploitation, no necessary exploitation in profit. And it's very important to get that right so that when you're attacked, you're not feeling guilty. You know, we were talking backstage about this idea that successful people often, at some point in their career, they decide they're going to engage in philanthropic enterprises, and they say, well, it's time for me to give back. It's like, well, what are you saying when you say that? I've been ripping you off for 30 years, and I've got away with it. Now I've got this pile of loot like Scrooge McDuck, and I'm going to give 10% of it back so I can pat myself on the back. Well, that's not a good story. If you've run, I mean, I've had a lot of jobs in my life, and I've run a number of businesses, and some of them have, run into serious trouble and not worked out well, and the others have thrived. And it is definitely the case that if you're going to run a business properly, that you have to run it as an ethical enterprise, and that there's no reason whatsoever to be apologetic about that. Quite the contrary. And one of the things that you could do on the leadership front, more broadly politically, let's say, especially in relationship to the ongoing culture wars, is to stop being guilty about what you're doing. Like you can't let the bloody radicals on the left, especially because they're jealous and envious and generally absolutely useless at doing anything even remotely productive.
Don't hold back. Tell us how you really feel.
You can't let them torture you into the guilt-ridden admission that your business enterprise has been exploitative. And it isn't exploitative merely because you generate a profit. I mean, look, if you're being a greedy weasel and you're ripping everyone else off, then you should stop doing that. But if you're offering genuine service to people, and you know that you are, if you have long-term returning customers, right? Because that means you've established a relationship with them. That's actually a sign that you're engaging in a highly ethical enterprise. And it's incumbent on you to stop being guilty about that. Like, and not just not guilty. It's like, no, up yours. What we're doing is good, not bad. You don't get to put us back on our heel morally.
That's the difference in a free market and a voluntary market.
Well, look, here's a way of thinking about it. You might want to get down to the core of what's ethical. How do you know that two people, that could be you and your customer, are engaged in an ethical enterprise? And the answer is, you both do it voluntarily, so there's no compulsion and force, but you do it in a manner that you both want to repeat. Like, that's actually the definition of ethical. And look, imagine you have a relationship with your wife or your husband. Hopefully that's the case. It isn't just that you have a relationship, you have a repeating sequence of micro relationships, right? An indefinitely repeating sequence of micro relationships. And insofar as each of those micro relationships is going well, you want to repeat them. And it's the fact that you're both voluntarily on board with that over the long run that indicates that it's an ethical enterprise. And you know well, as small business owners, or maybe some of you are larger business owners, that you mistreat even one of your customers at your peril. Because if you mistreat someone, they not only will they remember that, and they will never forget it. And we have a specialized module as human beings, by the way, to remember cheaters. So you might forget people you cooperate with, but you do not forget people that ripped you off. And not only that, you will tell everybody you know about it. If you mistreat a handful of your customers, I don't know how many, if you mistreat 100 customers, your business will fail. Because they'll tell 100 people, and that's 10,000. And that's probably enough to sink you. And so if you've been treating your customers well enough so that they've established long-term reciprocal relationships with you, same applies to your suppliers, then by definition, you're engaging in an ethical enterprise. And you might say, well, it could be better. It's like, well, good, make it better. But it's already ethical if it's sustainable. I hate that word, but you know what I mean. If it's voluntarily sustainable, it's ethical. And one of the wonderful things about a free market society, it is a society of voluntary exchange. That's what makes it ethical. Nobody has to be your customer. And certainly no one has to be your repeat customer or your supplier. And what that means is that you have to conduct yourself in a manner that's commensurate with mutual gain, right? And maybe mutual expanding gain in order for the whole game to continue. And that's what you want in your marriage, is you want repeated interactions in a manner that produces mutual expansion, so that you want to keep playing with your partner, let's say, but you want to do it in a way that makes the whole game better as you progress. You do exactly the same thing on the business front. And this isn't some hand-waving, moralistic whitewashing. It's like, no, companies that don't do that, companies that rip off their customers, fail. Companies that even mildly mistreat their customers